Welcome back to the Real Couchwives podcast where we overanalyze all things Bravo. Today we are recapping Summerhouse Season 8, Episode 4.
Yes, and Lindsay and Carl have joined the group for the second weekend in the Summerhouse. And yet again, here we are. A fight has occurred in a Lyft, specifically a Lyft, not an Uber.
Not an Uber.
Not an Uber. And we have not seen it, but it has basically pertained to Lindsay's sobriety and Carl's sobriety. So good signs for Carl and Lindsay.
I was flabbergasted when I saw that this is now the second weekend that Lindsay is calling out a very sober Carl, questioning his sobriety, throwing around the word drugs very nonchalantly, and taking zero accountability for it. So let's unpack this.
Let's get into it. So we start the episode off with the groups driving down for a fresh weekend in the Summerhouse. We have Jesse, West, Sierra, and Gabby driving in one, and West and Sierra are doing kind of like a little bit of a recap on their date, let's say. And then we have Carl and Lindsay arrive separately as well. It kind of seems a little bit like Lindsay's very much ready to have a little bit of a break, a little bit of a time out from Carl at this point. And so they're basically just waiting for the group to arrive to be able to have somebody else to talk to.
Yeah, their dynamic here is really telling, or less the dynamic and more like Lindsay's confessional. So Lindsay's like tanning, and I guess Carl's like, hi, like, do you want to talk to me? And she's like, leave me alone.
Let's play.
And she does say that, like, they're on top of each other a lot at home, right? She says that, like, Carl doesn't have a traditional 9 to 5, but also, like, Lindsay, you also don't have a traditional 9 to 5. But I guess it's more like she's doing things. She's an influencer, and I think Carl's still trying to figure out what he wants to do. So I guess he probably has more spare time.
Yes.
I think after the whole like 2.5 years of like, kind of lockdown we all went through, you can understand being like, well, we should have some space to miss each other. I think that's like normal. But the way that Lindsay says it is so rude. She's like, now we're going to spend our weekends together. And it's like, hi, I guess I have to talk to you now. Like,
yeah. And that's just it. Like, to a degree, I feel like, you should kind of want to be with your partner even when you've just like seen them like all the time, but also like, I don't know, isn't Carl the guy that you want to spend your life with? Like, shouldn't you have a little bit more excitement about him than that?
Especially since they're getting married so soon, you'd think that this is the time that they just want to be together all the time.
A little bit.
And like, even if there are times that you need your space, like, you both go to this weekend house to have fun. Like, I'm sure like what you do during the week is more like work, and then on the weekend it's more like fun. So it is a little bit of a different vibe. But anyways, it's telling of, where they're at.
Exactly. It's very telling of where they're at. So anyways, we have the group join Carl and Lindsay at the house, so they can kind of like, they now have that space. They now have different people to go and talk to, and Kyle and Amanda join them shortly after. At this point, we kind of have the group like split up a little bit into the two groups. We have the girls in the kitchen, and we have the boys in the backyard. The girls obviously are talking about Wes and Sierra's date, and kind of like a little bit on the kissing front, what went down there.
Lindsay gives
a Gabby.
Lindsay gives a reenactment. We really like the kissing reenactments in Bravo.
I thought it was interesting that Wes technically considered that to be girls are making out in the kitchen. Close enough, I guess. So the boys are also kind of talking about their relationships. Kyle actually opens up to Carl at this point to talk about kind of his issues with Amanda and how they kind of like flew under the radar last weekend because of the whole Carl and Lindsay thing.
Which is so funny, right? I feel like only one couple can be imploding at a time.
Exactly.
And then, like, didn't they even say it? Kyle and Amanda are kind of like, when Lindsay and Carl are fighting, it's like so bad that they're almost like, it makes them in a better place, which is weird.
Sad. Not great, honestly. And in this moment, Carl also opens up about the fact that he kind of had that conversation with Lindsay about his career and what he wants to do, and how she kind of vetoed the idea of the sober sports bar. And Kyle kind of mimics what we had said last week's episode, where we were like, ideally in that situation when your partner is telling you about an idea, even if you think it's like the worst idea in the world, you still kind of like play along a little bit. You're like, okay, well, like let's think about that. Let's see how we can, you know, maybe make that a reality or make a version of that a reality or
Yeah,
whatever.
and not just like point blank, like dismiss
Yeah,
it. Is
yeah.
it before this? Sorry, it's such a silly scene, but like when
What?
the boys were all together and they were like, "Oh, the dogs aren't here," then they're like, "There are some
Yeah.
dogs in this house," and then
Yes.
Carl starts barking, and then they all start barking,
Yeah, he
and
does
like,
the whoop whoop. I can't do
and like,
it. I can't bark.
you can't do the Carl bark.
I can't do the Carl bark.
Um, it was just so sweet that I feel
It was
like we
really
haven't
cute.
seen this side of playful Carl
I
in so
know. I
long.
know.
And I do
I
really
loved
like
it.
that he's vibing with the boys in the house
Yes.
again. And like he's just so much more like sure of himself as a sober person in this
Yeah.
house.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that these boys actually have like personalities and like they're
Yeah.
also kind of like contributing to that too cuz like I think Luke, while I think that they were genuinely like friends or at least like friendly with him, I don't think that they kind of had that kind of like broy like, oh, let's, you know, joke around and whatever thing.
Luke's like, rah, let's go cut some trees
Cut
and
some
like get
wood.
maple.
Let's talk about maple syrup some more. Yeah. Yeah, and I thought it was funny too that they thought that Carl, they were surprised by how deep Carl's bark was. They were they were anticipating more of like an arf arf instead of a bark bark. Anyways, so that's kind of what happens just at the beginning. You know, it's pretty easy settling in. The group starts to get ready for the night out. They're going to go out for supper. Um, Interesting here is that, you know, they sit down at the table at the dinner at the supper at the restaurant, and right off the bat, you know, drinks, like what's the drink situation. I think even like before this, like, we've already seen like Lindsay a little bit start to drink. I think
Mm-hmm.
she has. I think what Scott pointed out that she had like the glass of the rosé bottle like in front of her already, and she kind of has the rosé bottle in front of her. Unfortunately, basically the entire episode. So they all kind of settle on some dirty martinis, and at this point in time, Lindsay decides to make a toast.
Oh god, this toast was so cringe and like
Ew.
non-necessary.
Yeah, and I bring up the drinking just because like at this point in time she is like I think visibly toasted, right? Like I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
safe
Yeah,
assessment.
she's like, good vibes, good
Yeah.
vibes.
Yeah, and she
That was
talks about how
basically
she's
it.
like, yeah, that is basically it. She's like, oh, you know, I'm really enjoying this camaraderie, and like I'm really enjoying that, you know, the boys are bringing in boy energy, and this again is where Carl does his little bark.
Yeah.
And Wes says, "Did you hear Carl's bark?" And Lindsay says, "I don't want to hear Carl's bark because I might give the ring back."
Right? And then I think even Kyle was like, "What?"
They all like obviously editing. Who knows? It looked like everybody at that table was like, "Oh, what?
I have such a
Okay,
problem with this because like, look, I love a little couple banter and being able
yes,
to like make fun of each
yes,
other. I think that's so
yes."
important. This was not that. This was
No,
purely just dismissing and putting him down and like
yeah.
making fun of him more in a mean way.
Hmm.
And she would never stand for him to say something like that to her.
No, I don't want to hear Lindsay right now. Yeah, no, it would not happen. I do kind of think that okay, I kind of liken it to like a Michael Scott kind of like in the office
like
experience
like
where
he's
like
just she's just uncomfortable.
she's like trying to like do something that's like jabby and like in on the jokey, but like it just really doesn't land with the group in like the moment, and I think that that's kind of what it felt like that was.
Yeah, and I do also have to kind of just keep remembering that she is very uncomfortable coming into this house. She
Yes.
knows her relationships are kind of on shaky ground. Her and Carl are having their own issues, and
Yeah,
now she's adding
clearly.
alcohol on top of that. But
Yeah.
it
And
still kind
just
of was not great.
no, it was not great. But anyways, Kyle saves it and he's like, okay, yeah, let's just cheers and like let's move on, build a bridge, get over it. But yeah, so that was interesting. The group does bring up the kind of like little bit of the dynamic between Jesse and Paige and how like it was noticed that Jesse had not made a move but had kind of like, you know, been touching Paige in the weekend previously, and they mentioned the fact that Craig is going to be joining them next week, and that might be a thing that he wants to cool down before Craig gets there.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
glad they called him out on this. Like he was like, I
yeah,
haven't done anything, and Danielle's like,
yeah,
no, you kind of have. And then
yeah.
Sierra's just like, yeah, I would stop that. Like,
That might not be a good idea. Well, and then he like in his confessional, he kind of like flips it, and he's like, "Oh, I would never go after somebody. Like we just had like a flirty. They're imagining something because we both have beautiful smiles."
Yeah,
And it's like, no,
yeah.
in your first confessional, you were like, "I get with girls. The
Yeah,
best
yeah.
ones just happen to have boyfriends." Like,
But like, oh,
yeah,
I'm supposed to stop, and now he's like, oh yeah, that's a he. The way
I
he
would
put it,
never
he's
do
like,
that.
that's an extra, like, not barricade, but he's like, that's like an extra
Mm,
difficulty
an obstacle.
obstacle.
Yes, yeah,
It's
that
like that's
he wouldn't want to come up against. Yeah,
yes, an obstacle. Like
obstacle.
that's
Yes,
anyways.
interesting choice of words.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, so the group wraps up dinner. We see Amanda come home first, and we do get some shots of the group out partying, but pretty quickly we see Carl come home, and then a few moments later we see Lindsay come home. And this is obviously our first sign that something has gone down. Um, and Amanda notices as well. So Amanda actually comes out of her room to be kind of like poking around, seeing what's going on. She sees that Carl's arrived. She goes and talks to Lindsay.
Yeah.
Lindsay actually goes upstairs momentarily to try to like, I guess like just like maybe pretend that things are fine with her and Carl. She's like
Mm-hmm.
asking him if he can unzip like her dress so that she can get changed, and he's like, no,
Yeah.
point blank, no,
And
not
she's
gonna
like, oh,
happen.
why? And
Like we can only imagine why. We can only imagine why. So we luckily then get a little bit of a recap from Carl of what went down. He basically says that like he was tired. He wanted to go home. They got a lift together. In the lift, she was like, "Oh, are you okay?" And he was like, "Oh, right, like that.
yeah,
That feels
I
right,
think
right?"
he was like, I'm just tired. And she's like, and in his confessional, he's like, well, that wasn't good enough. That wasn't good enough an answer.
Yes,
So she
yeah,
kept
that's it.
poking, what's wrong? What's
Yeah,
wrong? Why aren't you talking to
yeah,
me? Why are you being
yeah,
weird?
yeah.
Are you on something? What are you on?
Yeah,
Again.
well, because I think he had asked like, oh, like, well, like you've been drinking, or like how much have you had to drink,
Oh,
or something
yes.
like that. And then, oh, actually, oh my god, I completely forgot this part too.
What?
In the dinner scene, there's like a moment when after she's given her toast, and sorry, okay,
It's
I'm getting too
okay.
excited. So she's finished her toast, and after she finishes her toast, like she's finished her entire martini. Did you notice that? The
No.
martini was gone within that like little speech.
Oh, wow.
And then as the dinner was like unfolding, she also like drops another martini at
Oh,
one
yes, I
point.
do remember that.
Oh, and I just think that there was probably like also something there, kind of like in the dynamic of Carl like feeling awkward about the fact that she was getting like a little like if you feel awkward when somebody's getting a little bit too wasted, and you're like,
Yeah, that's
oh,
true.
like you're doing weird things, you're making weird little mistakes. Like I don't love
Yeah.
this. So maybe he was just kind of also feeling awkward when he gets into the lift, and he's just like, you're drinking. Like let's just get home.
Yeah.
Let's just make it through
Like
one Friday
no
night.
no productive conversations can be had
No.
when one or two like well like when any amount of people in the conversation
Yeah.
is to a certain level, right? Like
Yeah.
and has just had too much to drink, there's no point. I know that
Hmm.
like she kind of like says that Carl doesn't like confrontation, and that is
Yeah.
true, but I don't
Yeah.
think that applies to this. I think he's really
Yeah.
just trying to be like there's no point in having this out right now. Like
Yeah. Well, and like even at that point, like right, like if you are like you're in front of a Lyft driver, right? Like it's like some random stranger
yeah.
is driving you
True.
home. Like you don't know how far like the restaurant to your house is. Like you have to be in that car with that person. And that poor soul has to just kind of be like, nothing going on here. La 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 la
The
la.
amount of like Uber and Lyft drivers that must have so much tea on these reality
Yeah.
shows.
Right. Oh my god. Um. But anyways, so Carl's kind of like attempted to get into bed. Lindsay's calling him like the biggest gaslighter ever, and she compares him to Sandoval. At that point, he basically is like, okay, like I'm out of here. He like gets up, he walks away. Lindsay also like goes and leaves, and she goes downstairs and she talks to Amanda. Carl goes to get into one of the like spare bedrooms. And poor Amanda, like she's really trying like in the moment to like de-escalate it. She can tell that like their tensions are high, something has gone on, and she's like, I'm just making ramen, just leave me
Yeah, Amanda is
alone.
so relatable in this season.
Yeah,
She went home. I love that she just kind of like is the only one who's like, I'm gonna go home,
yeah,
I'm
I'm
gonna put on my
done, I'm
pimple
good.
cream, I'm gonna go
Yeah,
into bed. I'm like, honestly,
yeah,
love that for
same,
you.
same.
Um,
Especially that house is like so outrageous. Like I would like, of course you would just want to be there all day, right?
yeah. And then yeah, she just like keeps, you could tell she's trying to like kind of not go against Lindsay because that's not gonna go great in the
Yes,
moment.
yeah.
And just be like,
She
okay,
wants to
like,
hear her out.
how are you feeling? Lindsay's had some pretty crazy things here, and also just like the ease of
Yeah,
which she can say these really horrible things about her fiance is wild.
on
So,
camera for a second weekend in the row,
oh,
like
not high five. Okay, I have a thumbs up that just appeared next to my
oh,
face because that is not the way
high
we're feeling right now.
five.
um,
No.
but yeah, it's crazy. Like some of the things that she starts to say basically is that he is like, yeah, he's gaslighting her, he's yelling at
Hmm.
her. He,
Yeah.
I guess, questioned, he's like, how much have you had to drink?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
she's like, he questioned my intake, so I'm going to question his intake.
Yeah, which is just like not a tit for tat situation at all either. Especially when you're kind of like the substances that she's allegedly comparing are substances that have very different effects on people. One is
Well,
very much supposed to be something that mellows you out, and the other one can very much be something that like agitates people.
well, this is the other thing too. She says later on that she's talking about weed because
Hmm.
Carl does smoke weed
Allegedly.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but she did not say weed. She said drugs. She
Hmm.
likened him to blank Carl
Yes.
last week.
Yeah.
She knows what she's doing here. Like
Yeah.
that, I don't buy this anyway.
Yeah, no, it's
It's so
true, and that's just
upsetting.
it because she says like to Amanda, like, if you're gonna accuse me of drinking, you better be clean. Obviously,
But
there
it's
are
like, no,
certain
why?
insinuations in
Why?
that. Yeah, I don't know, I don't know, because like I think it's just because it's like, oh, like I'm embarrassed about the fact that I'm drinking so much maybe too, and so I need to like pick at you as well.
That's true. And also like we'll talk about how this kind of like we see this conversation happen multiple times. But like it's
Hmm.
one thing to have the conversation drunk, but she has the same conversation sober the next day.
Yeah,
And it's the same thing she did last week as well.
and that's just it. She just doubles down, and she like, we don't know how much she like remembers of each of these like
Incidents,
instances.
instances.
Oh, how do I say that? But yeah, like it's on camera now, so you at least get to see it now.
And then she talks about him having like demons, right? And how she's
Yes,
like the only person in the world who sees his
ever
demons.
sees his bad side.
You
Yeah.
know what this made me think of? This is very similar to Sandoval being like, Ariana behind closed
Yes.
doors is like this
Yeah.
horrible monster and she's
Yeah.
so mean to me.
Meanest person in the
And
world.
yeah, now, this is kind of what Lindsay is trying to liken Carl to because
Yes.
obviously we're not seeing that same Carl.
Hmm.
Also, Carl has dated other people. So if I'm sure you're
Yeah.
not the only person in the world who has seen different parts of Carl.
Yeah, but she is the only person in the world that's seen sober Carl, because she's the only person he's dated in this like version of himself, right? Like it's been a while
That's
since
true. So
somebody
what do
dated
you
him.
think about this statement?
I mean, well, so she also like in this moment she goes on to compare him to like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yes.
Is it Mr. Jekyll? No, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And it's just like, oof, it's so rich once
It's like
again coming from somebody such as yourself, Lindsay, who really does feel like you do have like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde
she
side of
has a flip
yourself.
that she switch like she literally has a
Totally.
switch that goes off
Yeah.
after she's drank too much and she becomes someone different.
Hmm.
And I also think it's like it's kind of a damaging thing to put out there too because like we have seen Carl through very not great times. Like no one
Yes.
thinks that Carl is this like amazing angel,
Hmm.
but to say it now while he's sober feels like it's really different.
It does, and that's just it. I actually put that in my notes too. I was like, we as the audience have seen a pretty awful side of Carl. Like we've definitely been exposed to some of his demons. Yeah, it's been a few seasons since we've seen them, but I have at least a long enough memory to remember, seasons 1 to 5 of Carl, and
Well,
it
totally.
wasn't always pretty. It
And
wasn't always pretty.
I'm sure there are parts that do come out more on Lindsay. But
Hmm.
also like when you take that and you also look at her rendition and her account of some of the things that have gone on, it's
Yeah.
kind of hard to trust this statement too. Like last week and also later on, she when he gets escalated,
Mm-hmm.
rightfully so, because she is
Mm-hmm.
literally questioning his sobriety, she's like,
Mm-hmm.
why are you yelling at me? You're
Yeah.
yelling at me. Why are you gaslighting me? And he's not
Yeah.
doing any of those things. So
No.
like it just kind of like diminishes the statement that she's
Yes.
saying.
It does. And yeah, like I you also think back to like when they dated the first time, right? I don't like what was that, season 4? I think when they were like briefly dating. And just like I just remember like those versions of the two of them and those fights that they would get into. Like I really don't think that like I think that Carl has come such a long way, and yet I do feel like Lindsay is still in those like season 4 versions of these fights where she's very much still behaving that way.
It's
And it's actually,
true.
yeah, it's actually interesting too because Jesse like later on in the
Yes.
episode asks about like her like, oh sorry I have like a hair, asks about her like having always been this way, and he's like, no, I thought we like matured out of this. And
Yeah, Jesse's kind of picking up on this. Also, it is
yeah.
really interesting seeing Jesse come in being the only person who I guess doesn't really know Lindsay, and he's kind of like,
What is
did
this?
what? Yeah,
What am I
he's like,
witnessing?
what's happening? Like, is
Yeah.
just have you not known that she's been like this though? Like,
Yeah.
is this new?
Yeah, exactly. Is this like a Bridezilla thing that I've heard so much about? Yeah, well, and that's just it. So the group does come back. Everybody like kind of like returns back to the summer house. And Jesse and I think Jesse and Gabby are like sitting down. You can't really see like the full angle because they're sitting down at the table, and it's just like the like one of the like, little cameras that like looks at them.
Yeah.
And he's like if you guys are like an engaged couple, like you'd really need to figure this out. And Gabby's saying, well, wedding planning is stressful. And he's like, no, I disagree. And she's like, well, have you ever planned a wedding? And he's like, no, but you figure it out. And it's just like he's clearly like he's seeing a version of this, and he's like, this is not acceptable.
No, you
And
can't blame this on like planning a
wedding
wedding.
planning,
Like
no.
it's so
Yeah.
crazy. And then I really
Yeah.
liked his confessional too. He's like, I've never been like engaged before, so I
Yeah.
don't know what I don't know, but
Yeah.
I don't think it should feel this way. Like this looks miserable.
This is bad. This is bad. And even Gabby in like, and that's interesting too, is that like Gabby in this moment is defending them, not knowing kind of like what else has gone on tonight,
Yes.
because she hasn't seen that yet either. She hasn't heard about it yet either. Danielle very smartly decides though that she will be the one to continue to just stay out of it. So.
Yeah.
Good on you, Danielle. So the next morning, I guess I should have mentioned that like the reason that they like start to have that conversation about the two of them is because the group at least discovers that Lindsay and Carl are not sleeping in the same bed.
Oh yes, this is
That's
the
a key part
second.
of the
So this is the
information.
second night. This is their second weekend in the house, and is their
Yeah.
second time they're not sleeping in the same bed,
Yes.
but blindsided Lindsay.
Yes. Totally blindsided. Had no idea this was coming. So Carl gets up. He makes the bed. He does a very good job. I was quite impressed. As somebody who has like a really OCD level of needing the bed to be like perfectly made, I was a for effort there, Carl. And we get a little confessional from him. And interestingly, I think that this is our first indication of why Carl did call cameras to do the breakup at the end of the season, right? He basically says, like, in this confessional, I understand that this didn't happen on camera, and I'm sorry that you guys, kind of speaking to like production and speaking to the audience, of like,
Right.
you guys didn't get to see this. And it's like, ooh.
That was interesting, right? I feel like they never
Yeah.
actually break the fourth wall that much.
That intensely, yeah. And that really feels like that gives us like that like little bit of a glimpse into like why within a month when they do break up, we're gonna see it on camera. Because he knew he needed witnesses.
Yeah, I mean, she also changes the story a lot, so
And she does, and that's just it. Like even over the course of this episode, the version of what we're hearing from her and from him, honestly, like changes a lot based on kind of like the conversations that are happening with the different people in the house.
true.
Yeah.
And to be fair too, like we obviously don't know what goes on behind closed doors. I think we're kind of like reacting to what we are seeing of Lindsay and the way that she's handling this. But then his stories also are kind of corroborated by the rest of the group. Like
yes.
when he says what went down and what other people say went down, like it is pretty similar.
Yeah, and I say this as somebody who usually doesn't take men's side, so I
think like this is not. Well, actually,
yeah.
I think when this all broke, we were all kind of like, let's maybe wait and see what happens and take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, like we don't want to be being like, yay, Carl,
Yeah,
boo, Lindsay.
Carl. Let's get another bad edit for year for Lindsay. Everything's
Yeah.
always her fault. Like we definitely don't want it to be like coming off that way, but yeah,
But she's not giving us much to work
it's
with
it's
otherwise.
it's not going great. And even in his confessional here, like Carl talks about how like his issue isn't really with her drinking per se. It's more about like her behavior when she's drinking and the person that she kind of becomes and how she becomes aggressive and volatile and kind of just like a little bit unhinged, a
Mm-hmm.
little crazy,
Which we've seen for
unfortunately.
many seasons.
Yeah.
And we've also seen with Carl, and,
Yes. And part
he,
of the reason why he needed to get sober was because of this, right? Like
yeah.
his aggressiveness, his reaction to things, the way that he was, you know, the person that he became in those moments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we have the little conversation about between Jesse and Carl about the night before that you mentioned. Jesse kind of being like, "Oh, like, is this how this is supposed to be? Like, is this good? Is this normal?" And Carl being like, "Yeah, this is kind of normal."
Yeah, he's like, she's
Uh,
kind of been like she does have these tendencies, but I thought we would like grow
yeah,
and move on
yeah.
from them.
Thought we were moving past it, and it kind of I can understand why Carl felt that way because it did feel like last summer was a little bit better,
It's
but
so different, right? And I wonder
yeah,
if last summer was just so about like them being like, we need to put on this
a
perfect
united
couple,
front,
like we
yeah,
need to prove everyone
maybe.
wrong, and we need to get engaged. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, they were just it does feel like they were in a better place last summer. We'll leave it at that. So the house rises. Everybody kind of like goes and starts to like gravitate towards the kitchen. Carl and Lindsay clearly kind of still have a little bit of like awkwardness of like the next day. Carl kind of goes to open the door for Lindsay as she's trying to like escape out the and like go to the pool instead, like not be around him. And when he kind of like opens the door for her, she's like, "Oh, it's okay," and then he just like slams the door behind her because he's clearly like upset that she's like behaving the way that she's behaving, and she's like, did he just slam the door behind me?" Um,
Yep.
yeah. So Lindsay goes and talks to Amanda. They kind of do another little bit of a debrief of the night before, like what happened. She's talking about how like, okay, is it maybe like hypocritical? Like, do we need to be talking about wait, sorry. She brings it up. Okay, because Lindsay finds it to be kind of like hypocritical for Carl to be bringing up her drinking when he's not somebody that's like 100% sober. And this is where she kind of like brings up it like the idea that the drugs that Lindsay is referring to is smoking pot and not anything more serious than that.
This
Um,
is 4 episodes in when we figure this out. Like, this is
yeah,
too long. Like, she's
yeah.
been leading on just with the
The
drugs. And
drugs, clean, sober, other
yeah.
words.
And
Yeah,
Amanda calls that out too. She's like, you've been saying quite a few times now, like
yeah.
drugs, and you haven't been specifying.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, one kind of nice thing about this scene and kind of like the way that this day progresses in general is that we see the group kind of like gather at the pool and like actually have like a little bit of a pool day, which I feel like is actually a pretty rare occurrence for them. Does that feel accurate to you? Because I feel like I've never really seen that before.
um I'm not sure. I couldn't. Yeah, I guess
No.
not super frequently that I can remember. Yeah, I liked when
Because
they were judging the boys
yeah.
like cannonballs and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Carl got an 8.776 for like his pencil dive, which was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I did not know that that was a thing. And then Jesse and Jesse beats out West for his cannonball. Basically, it's not nothing fancy. The girls go in to get ready because they're going to go to Cowfish, and the boys actually do a little bit of a debrief at the pool. Carl is obviously talking about kind of like his version of the events, what happened and what unfolded last night. And we get kind of like the if she really wanted to see the old Carl, because Kyle brings up the fact that like she told Gabby that he was acting like old Carl. He's like, if she really wanted to see old Carl again, like I will be gladly able to oblige. I will burn this house down and I will drink 15 lover boys right now, and then we'll have a
Yeah,
real problem. And
yeah.
you could feel his anger in that moment.
Oh
It
yeah,
was
totally. And
palpable.
even before, when he was telling the boys what had gone down, like he's like
Hmm.
he starts to like basically cry and
Yeah,
tear
like
up a bit. It's like,
yeah,
this is really serious. Like,
yes.
this is questioning his whole new identity, and like
Hmm.
it's
Yeah,
I saw him
yeah.
on Watch What Happens Live too, and like when they kind of talk about this and like
Mm-hmm.
calling off the wedding, he's like, I felt like we didn't have a stable foundation.
Yeah.
Like, and a wedding should be a
A
celebration
celebration.
of your
Yeah.
relationship, and we didn't even have any stability and we just weren't
Mm-hmm.
there yet. And it's like
Yeah.
you can see that in these moments. Like these are huge problems they needed to fix.
Mm-hmm.
He also
Yeah.
brings up too that it's not always about alcohol, but alcohol is what kind of like brings out, I guess, those conversations.
Yes. Yes. Well, and the thing is, like, also, like, we're kind of seeing two different, like, not narratives, but kind of like, issues kind of play out in parallel, right? We have the issue of the drinking and the questioning the sobriety and, like, them kind of like having struggles over that. But then we're also seeing the, like, issue of, like, Carl kind of like trying to find himself and, like, not, like, having anything set in his career. And also, like, then kind of like not having Lindsay, like, fully, like, support what he wants to do next and like the sports bar idea and whatever,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like for both of those to be kind of like on shaky ground at the same time
Yeah.
is obviously also like not great situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, totally.
Yeah. So anyways, we finally gotten that scene from the trailer though, because I was waiting for that to happen. I was like, okay, yeah, wow, episode 4, we're already there.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see how this rest of the season goes. um, unicorns and rainbows, no doubt. So the group goes ahead and starts to get ready because they're going to go to Cowfish, which never heard of, but
Me
sure,
neither. That's a name.
sure, it's great.
Cowfish.
Sounds lovely. um, I don't think it's as pertinent as what we've like seen previously, but I did notice like once again that like Lindsay like is like, oh, I'm gonna go get a glass of rosé, and by glass of rosé she means the entire bottle, and bring it up to her and Gabby's room so that they can get ready. And it was just like the pouring of the rosé, and I was just like, oh god, I'm getting a headache just looking at all this rosé. Like it's too much. It's not safe to consume copious amounts of rosé in such quantities.
Despite being told rosé all day.
Yeah, exactly. This is the recipe for disaster, if you ask me. So they go to Cowfish, and it's actually kind of interesting what kind of happens in this like
The car rides.
this location. Oh yeah, I didn't really have anything on the car
Well,
rides. Did you want to talk about the car rides?
the thing that came to mind is mainly
Yeah.
just when Gabby's driving one of the cars and Jesse's like,
Yes.
"Oh, I'm
Okay.
Team
Yeah, you're right.
Carl," and
Yes.
he was like, she's
Well,
saying some stuff again.
because Sierra asks him like, "Oh, like Jesse, who do you think you're gonna fight
Oh
today?"
yes,
And he's like, "Lindsay." And you're like, "Ooh."
yeah. And then Gabby's like, "Oh, like yeah, about like what
Last
happened last
weekend.
weekend," and he's like,
Yeah.
"No, it happened again," and she's like,
Yeah.
"What?" Like, and
Yeah. She's
then
only finding out in this moment.
yeah.
Oh,
And
that's
she has a good
actually yeah.
confessional too. Is at
Yeah.
that point, right? I
Yeah, you're
think.
right. Actually, I completely missed that. That is a really good confessional. Do you want to say what it was about?
Yeah, from what I remember,
If you
she.
want, I have it written down too.
Okay, yeah, take
Yeah.
take it away.
Okay, sorry. So basically, Gabby says, I know a lot of people that have gotten married, and I know how stressful the months leading up to the wedding are, but it's murky at best and extremely shitty at worst to accuse someone of what Lindsay is accusing Carl of. And yeah,
Yeah,
that's Gabby's take on the Carl and Lindsay situation.
yeah. She's
And
like she's gonna have to own up to that, and this is why I love Gabby. Like she's been a friend to Lindsay, but she's still like that was not okay, and she
yeah.
does call her out a little bit later in the episode, which Lindsay does not like and
Hmm.
does not seem to end well.
No, it does not end well. Actually, it was a very interesting ending of the episode. Um, so at Cowfish, I kind of thought that there was like three things that was kind of happening here. We have a little bit of a state of the union between the couples of the house, which I thought
Oh
was
yeah,
interesting.
that's true.
Obviously, we find out that Sierra is a little bit concerned about the fact that West is like such a public person and she's such a private person. She's someone who like really tries to keep like control and like play it close to the vest and like not divulge a lot of information to the group or very like calculated in
Hmm.
what she divulges to the
Yeah.
group. We have Kyle and Amanda kind of doing a little bit of a check in on their relationship as well. They obviously talk about the fact that like Lindsay and Carl are also on jumpy ground, but they do actually kind of admit that they can at least admire that Carl and Lindsay are like trying to communicate and they are like actively working on that, even if they're not in the best place, which I thought was nice of them to give them that little compliment.
Hmm.
Um, and Kyle kind of wants them to basically go to like couples therapy, and Amanda's like, no, I'm not ready for that, but ask me on the right day and maybe I'll say yes. So
Yeah.
seems promising. That seems
Mm-hmm.
promising. That seems fair.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the final state of the union between the three couples, is Carl and Lindsay, and this is just a big old mess. Like
It's a mess.
this is not a productive conversation. They fully just try to rehash like what happened last night. They both have their own version of events, clearly. Carl is accused of gaslighting. Carl accuses Lindsay of gaslighting. And it doesn't really get anywhere. And it actually ends up with both of them like walking in different directions, or,
Yeah.
yeah.
And this is it again too. Like this is where Lindsay is kind of doubling down on like, well, you're questioning my intake. Like, do you not smoke weed? And he's like, yeah, but I wasn't at that time. And also like
Mm-hmm.
weed doesn't turn you. I just don't understand
Yeah.
why she's bringing that up. Like you could even like, let's say he was smoking weed.
Yeah.
What does that change about your behavior having drank too
Mm-hmm.
much and kind of like taking it out in this way? Although like, obviously this is a thing that I think a lot of people are pointing out. Like even Sierra, remember like last week I think was like, Carl, like how are you gonna have how do you have a
Mm-hmm.
relationship when you are completely sober
Yeah.
and someone else is not? And
Yeah.
she also has a tendency to kind of go off the rails when she drinks. Like this is
Mm-hmm.
going like I can see
Yeah.
why this is such like a difficult thing for them to figure out in their
Mm-hmm.
relationship.
Yeah. And like not only does she like drink a lot, and then, or at least in like what we're seeing, like maybe this is just, even if this is just during the months when Summerhouse is filming, and like most of the time she's having like a glass or two of like rosé or whatever, a night, like, and she's not having like these like big like fly off the handle kind of moments, you know, it's still indicative of who she can become when she's drinking. And it's like, okay, well then you have to do what Kyle says that he has to do, which is like fall on the sword and like just admit that you're the problem, and just like that's the only way that you can find peace with Lindsay when she
Yeah.
gets like, she
And
gets like this.
And this is it too. Like, I really don't want to look like we're shaming Lindsay for drinking or anything like that. Carl even says it. He's like, people can drink and not turn the way that Lindsay is turning. It's that she
Hmm.
drinks and then she becomes really volatile and kind
Yeah.
of mean and like
Yeah.
irrational.
Hmm.
Those are two very different things.
Yeah, and that's just it. And like, and then it's not even like if you were just being aggressive and like you were kind of like picking a fight, because like I also like I think everybody has a friend who like when they drink they get a little bit aggressive,
Mm-hmm.
to then get aggressive and then also be like, well, you're actually not the one that's sober right now, or like
This is
I'm
it.
not sober but you're also not sober,
Well,
like
yeah,
what?
this is like honestly, it's very crazy that she threw out the "you're being like Sandoval" right now because she is having a lot of Sandoval isms
Yeah,
in this episode. Like, well, what
yes.
if you're saying that? Well, what about you? Like, what are
Yeah.
you doing?
Right. Don't
Which
you know what you're responsible for right now? Because you're really the problem.
it's
Yeah.
just and this is the thing. It's like it's less, or I think it's really insane that this happened at all when she was drinking, but her continuing to double down. And then also
Hmm.
when she goes and tells people about it, she's like, he's yelling at me.
He's
And it's like,
crazy. He's
yeah, he's
lying to
yelling at you.
me.
You literally
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
questioned this man's sobriety, and that's so
Yeah.
important to him on
Yeah.
camera
Yeah.
multiple times.
Hmm.
And then and like, yes, he's gonna raise his voice. Like,
Yeah.
and the part that you took away from this conversation was he yelled at me.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. And then she even ends the, like, this was also so insulting. She even ends the fight by saying, I knew that you were too angry and not ready to have this conversation, and she walks off. And it's like, what? Okay.
Yeah,
Like and that's just it, right? Like all day she's been ignoring him. She hasn't been talking to him. He's the one that has to come over to her once again, just like at the beach last weekend, where he was the one that had to come over to her. Luckily this time when he did come over, she was like, do you want to talk? But like obviously like him doing that is him indicating like, I want to talk, like, hey, let's try to get to a normal place. And then she's like, you're just too irrational, like I can't even talk to you right now. I knew that this wouldn't even work because I knew that you were too angry to have this conversation. Like it's just like,
it's so bad. It's insane. And look, like, yeah, but the
yeah.
whole like, oh my god, like maybe if you stop yelling at me, I'll have a conversation with you. And
Yeah.
he's like, I'm upset. Like she doesn't understand that what she said was super hurtful. And like I
Yeah.
also don't like confrontation. I don't like yelling,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't condone that. But like in this
Yes.
situation, like I think he
Yeah.
was, and yeah, he's gonna raise his voice. Like what else is he
Yeah.
gonna do? Like
Yeah. It's just supposed to like, yeah, be like, "Oh, you're right, Lindsay. I'm sorry. I actually was not sober yesterday. You were right. You and your non-sobriety were 100% right about my
he
non-sobriety."
he was 100% sober. Even if he wasn't, I don't think it would have changed. I think it's still incredibly hurtful that she said it.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah.
at least if she was thinking it was, just weed, then say that. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that she just said, "What are you on? You're not sober." Like those are,
Yeah.
the way that she framed it was really, really dangerous.
Yeah, and damaging, and
Yeah.
yeah. Anyways, so luckily, they go their separate ways. Amanda and Jesse actually kind of come over to Carl and kind of like, talk to him. Amanda is very understanding. She's like, we've all witnessed this side of Lindsay. And so we kind of like understand where you're coming from or how you're feeling in this moment because we've been there. And Kyle, bless his heart,
Tries
it
to
couldn't be
talk to.
me. It couldn't be me. Yeah, he tries to talk to Lindsay and she just won't hear it is basically the moral of the story.
I'm actually really impressed with how Kyle is handling both Carl and Lindsay in these
Hmm.
fights. Like, I think he's trying to actually see their perspective, but
Yeah.
he's obviously like riding for Carl, and he's trying to show
Yeah.
that to Lindsay in a respectable way.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's like a new
Yeah.
Kyle
Yeah.
side.
I do, and I really think that Kyle is like an exceptional like reality TV star. Like I think that he's really good at like doing this work because not everybody's like able to do this, right? Not everybody's kind of like able to talk to somebody who's like just had this conversation and like try to like hear her out and talk about it and see her side and see his side and do that kind of messy work. So A+ to Kyle as well. Two A+ given out in this episode.
Yeah.
So that is the end of Cowfish. The group goes home. We are drawing to the end of this episode. Gabby goes to talk to Lindsay in Lindsay's room, and it's just kind of like those like one of those like little awkward things where like Lindsay and Carl are kind of like trying to avoid each other, do that little dance.
Oh my God, so
Um,
uncomfortable.
it's really
Can you
uncomfortable.
literally imagine hiding in a room from your fiance like 4 months before you're gonna get married
Yeah,
on both of their ends?
like
Like,
literally, like here, let me like just like back away, back out of this room. Like, I don't want to be in this situation. Um, so basically, Gabby asked Lindsay, um, because she's obviously heard that like that Lindsay had said that Carl wasn't sober last night. Lindsay claims that she was like, well, if you want to judge me for drinking alcohol, then what did you do? Did you smoke weed? Like that's kind of again like her kind of like take on like how that conversation actually went down. We have the Carl and Lindsay hiding in the bathroom thing. Carl obviously like has like walked into Gabby's room. He says that he's sorry. And sorry, this is like so chaotic because there's just
it's
like so
really
many like
chaotic.
tiny
Yeah.
little moments in the scene. Um, and basically, but like Lindsay's hidden. She comes back out. She's like, "What did he say?" Gabby's like, "Well, he said that he was sorry." And Gabby like kind of just like, gives a little bit of like tough love to Lindsay in this moment. She's like, you guys need to find a better way to communicate. And Gabby says, what is your responsibility is knowing your partner and knowing how to effectively communicate to him in a way that he's going to understand. And Lindsay, as somewhat predicted, reads that as, like everything is on me. It's on me to like communicate with my partner. It's on me to find a way to effectively communicate with him, make sure that he understands what I'm saying.
Yeah,
And
this
it's like, well,
whole
no, that's
relationship, everything in this
it's all my
relationship is on
it's
me. And
my
it's like
job.
literally, it's not what she was saying at all.
Yeah.
Also, I was surprised that she was snapping at Gabby, who
Yeah.
is like her one ally right now.
Yeah.
Even at the beginning when she's like, you guys need to find a way to communicate. She's like, do you think I don't know that? Like,
Yeah, yeah. I know. And then yeah, basically it ends with Lindsay just like walking out of the house. She's just like, "Peace, I'm done." Um and yeah, that was the episode.
it's
uh
wild. I'm
it
like,
was
I
crazy.
continue to just be shocked at what we are seeing play out.
Yeah, right. And then even like her like deciding to like the way that she like decides to like walk out and like leave the house, like she like picks up her bag, she goes and walks out the front door, she walks like out the gate and like she like doesn't even like open the gate. She like slides through the gate and then she just like walks into like the Hamptons and it's like I don't think this is like a doesn't seem like it's a road where you can just like walk to something on. Like, I don't think there's like sidewalks. Like, there doesn't seem to be like pedestrian friendly options here. This is random. Like, just, I don't know, if you want to leave, like call an Uber or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
Like, it
she's
just
just like,
feels
I need to get out
weird.
of this house.
I just like me
Um,
slide out here.
it's also just so crazy that like even when Carl is asked about this and like Watch What Happens Live or like press that he does
Hmm.
after, like
Yeah.
he doesn't even really have to say much. He's basically
No.
just like, you guys are seeing it play out. Like
Yeah.
he truly doesn't even really have to explain.
Yeah. One thing that is interesting that he has kind of had to explain, because in last week's Watch What Happens Live with Lindsay, we find out that she gave the ring back because Carl requested it back, because
Oh, I
apparently
didn't
that's New
see
York State
that.
law. Oh, you didn't see that? So
Mm-mm.
it's New York State law apparently that you have to give the ring back if the marriage doesn't take place, because the owner of the ring then becomes whoever like purchased the
Oh,
ring.
okay.
So
What if
Carl
it was
got
Bravo?
it's a good question. I guess it would be Bravo's ring.
Yeah.
It's like the Love is Blind rule.
Yeah.
And so so he then talks about that in his episode of Watch What Happens Live this week, where he's like, yeah, well, it's the law. It's the law. And he didn't have much better of an answer than that. Trishelle did not agree. She did not think that that was the way for him to have done that.
Oh, really? She thought that
Yeah,
she
she
should
thought that
keep the ring?
she should have been able to keep the ring. And I was like, under normal circumstances I would say yes, but I do think because he's still paying the rent for the apartment he doesn't live in, at least the ring kind of feels like an equal exchange for that. Like, I'll pay the rent for the next year that we have this apartment together.
Next year.
Yeah. Oh my god. Okay, so did you not see
No,
Lindsay's Watch What
I
Happens Live?
didn't
Oh my
see
god.
it.
Okay, so on Lindsay's Watch What Happens Live, we also find out that like basically in July last year, a month before they broke up, they re-signed the lease for their $13,000 a month apartment, and Lindsay was like, "Well, like if you knew you were going to break up with me, like why were you the one that was like getting us to re-sign a lease for a whole year?" So like obviously he has to pay for it, because if he knew that he was going to break up with me, he should have like not gotten
Okay.
us to. And I was like, okay, that's fair. Like, yeah,
That's
I
fair,
agree.
but I also still kind of believe that like I don't think Carl wanted that conversation to end in a breakup. I think he was
Yeah,
just like, we're not in a place where we can get married,
yeah, yeah.
but it
That's
just
fair.
evolved.
Yeah.
But yeah, he should have brought up these questions definitely earlier.
Hmm.
And also earlier because like them canceling the wedding resulted in financial losses for a lot of people who were
Yeah.
stuck in those
Yes.
hotels.
Yes. And then either went to those hotels too,
Or
right?
they
Like
went
some people
and then
still ended up going,
Lindsay
even though
hated
no
them.
one. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, I get it, but like at the same time, like optics for sure, but also like it's a paid for vacation, and we've stayed at that hotel. We know how nice that hotel
Oh
is.
my god, my dream is to go back to that hotel.
One day, one day. Anyway, so that's the episode.
Wild, wild, wild,
Yeah, so
wild.
crazy. It was a good one. It was a good one.
Where do we
Excited
go
for
from
next week.
here?
I don't know. I
Because
literally
we
don't
don't even
know.
know, right? Because it was just a to be continued.
It was just a to be continued. Yeah.
We
I'm
shall
excited.
see. Well,
We
thank
shall
you
see.
for walking us through that recap.
Yeah, unhinged as it was.